Big things are popping in purple and gold, and also a little bit in olive and sky blue. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman. This is Louisiana versus All Recruit That Boot, and there is an awful lot to unpack, an awful lot of exciting news for LSU fans. Lamar Brown staying, DeAnthony Lafayette's coming to town, Sam Petito and a bunch of guys on that Austin Thomas staff are making their ways back to Baton Rouge or to Baton Rouge. We'll talk about all of these developments for the Tigers, as well as some names to watch next on the recruiting trail for LSU. Some sad news as well with Zyron Forstall leaving the state, announcing on Tuesday that he's heading to IMG Academy to finish up high school. And then we have a commitment watch in place for an in-state prospect who may be joining this Tulane class. Certainly the Green Wave seem well positioned with a young man out in Lafayette, and so we'll get to that as well. But Sam, obviously just rattling it all off, there's an awful lot to cover. I thought we'd be slow times by now, after Lamar Brown's commitment announcement on Thursday, but just one thing after another continues to pop up ahead of the season.
'Tis the season, Jarrett. I'm just sitting here wishfully waiting for things to slow down, and they never stop. It's July 15th, and we're still awaiting that very, very relaxing vacation.
I'm lined up for a little staycation in New Orleans later this week, just perfectly in time for the days I'm supposed to be in the Airbnb. And we now have a tropical depression or storm or whatever the hell coming to town. And so as much as we looked at our options, and we're like, you know what, let's get a place with a pool. We're going to have some nice sunny days. We're going to pick a spot that's walkable to some great restaurants. It is now like 80% chance to rain on the exact days that we're supposed to be back home down there. And so that sucks a ton for someone that hates the rain, but that's where we're at, man. That's the only days that we could actually, like, me and Allison coordinate our respective schedules.
It is New Orleans in the summertime, and a thunderstorm is as likely as anything. It's as likely as a tire popping.
Yeah. Well, let's look back at the end of last week where it was raining commitments both, to the class and to the staff for LSU. And we'll start with obviously the big commitments on Thursday from a roster standpoint. Lamar Brown, a dude that we mentioned last week, we've talked about as much as anybody in this 2026 Louisiana class. And when we spoke last Tuesday, we're still extremely uneasy whether this was going to be an Aggies commitment or a Tigers commitment. It remained uneasy and tough to call for the coaches on both sides of the equation up until really late Wednesday night when it started to seem like it was sorting itself out. And by 12:15 on Thursday afternoon, Lamar Brown was an LSU Tiger, said that was home. He was staying put, joining that class, ready to start recruiting more members to join the 26 class, and was shutting down his recruitment. He was all locked in and focused. What the heck happened during the last 24 hours of this thing that really kind of settled it, where we started to get some word late Wednesday night and early Thursday morning that the Tigers were well positioned and we're going to land this guy?
Yeah, well, your timeline is exactly right, but let's look at the bigger stretch here. Once LSU was able to get Lamar Brown back on campus for that final official visit, it had been on his mind, and he had mentioned that in the days leading into his decision. Asked when it started to settle in, and after getting back to campus, and credit the staff for the full court press on July 16th or so, when it's looking like he is not going to go to Baton Rouge for an official visit that final weekend, potentially going back to Texas A&M for their final official visit weekend that yielded commitments from guys like Brandon Arrington and Bryce Perry Wright, who are the blue chippers in the Aggies 2026 class. He gets back to LSU. I think that evens this race. And then it's been basically LSU battling A&M, making a sizable NIL leap. Still not as great as Texas A&M's offer, but extremely competitive. And like I said on the show a week ago, if Lamar Brown wanted to go to A&M, it was going to be because he wanted to go out of state. He wanted to create his own legacy out in College Station, and because his relationships with Mike Elko and the defensive line tandem of Sean Spencer and Tony Gerard-Eddy were better than the opportunities available to him at home with that staff that's been recruiting him since the 9th grade. In the end, with all things being even, he elected to stay home, carve out his legacy in Louisiana. It was an emphasis of this staff, like it is with most Louisiana kids, that anything they do in the state of Louisiana will not only count more during their college years, but years and decades after. And they've shown that time and time again. This was I think that we did a fantastic job of painting how close this really was between Texas A&M and LSU. And listen, by Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, when Lamar did not have his decision in place as expected, I think the entire country realized just how close Texas A&M made this. But the night before, things started to look pretty good for LSU. It looked like his mind was fully locked in, and by Thursday morning, we knew he was going to be a Tiger.
Hell of a job by Kevin Peoples, who has started to flex a bit on the recruiting trail with some of the job that he's done with the edge rushers coming into LSU. Frank Wilson, who has been involved in this recruitment from the time that Lamar was heading into high school, and LSU became his first offer that summer before his freshman year. Frank has been such a pivotal piece of this from start to finish for Lamar. And a lot of the pieces that you mentioned in terms of this is a life decision for a Louisiana guy, not just, a next 3 to 5 years. Lamar kind of mentioned when he talked to us after the announcement, you could kind of hear some of those things that I think resonated, messages from Frank and those guys. Lamar talked about just the familiarity with this LSU program and knowing not just those two guys we mentioned, not just Brian Kelly, not just Austin Thomas, but top to bottom, feeling like he had relationships with everyone involved. And I wrote a feature later that day as Lamar announces in his championship gold LSU baseball jersey on ESPN that A&M did a hell of a job making College Station feel like a place that could be home for Lamar at the next level. But the more Lamar thought about it, the more he realized he already was home, and just the significance of being a Louisiana guy in that jersey and the cultural aspects and all those things. Saw Keelan Moses on the way out. He was one of the first guys to congratulate Lamar after the broadcast ended. And Keelan talked about the visit that Lamar took and their opportunity to sit in that Skyline Club and look out over the field that night. And Keelan mentioning, man, this is the place that we have grown up dreaming about playing. And every time you cross that bridge from the west side coming from Irwinville over to Baton Rouge, you're looking at this stadium and dreaming of playing there one day. And, you go where you've got to go. I understand that I'm going to support you wherever, but it really does kind of hit different to be a Louisiana guy and play for LSU. And that's something I tried to explain to one of the A&M writers last week, who mentioned, man, if he can go where he wants to go and it's not other people telling him where to go, he's coming to A&M. And I said, I don't think y'all necessarily understand that, once it comes decision time and guys are thinking about, am I going to pass up on playing for LSU to go someplace else? Some guys will, but the pull of that in a one power conference school state like an LSU in Louisiana is really tough to beat, especially when you have consistent reminders of, man, this was the dream for all of us growing up, like Keelan Moses had, or like Frank Wilson had, and everybody throughout the process. And that really clearly resonated heavily with Lamar down the stretch.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Keelan was a big factor in this. We know that A&M had Keelan thinking not just once, but twice in his recruitment before he ultimately signed with LSU. And he is the second of the Moses boys following a different path than his brother, who did go to Alabama. He played for the legendary Nick Saban. He won a national championship. He was a draft pick rather, out of Alabama. And Keelan, has seen what life has been like for Dylan, since his NFL career came up shorter than expected. And I think he's trying to right the ship, and it'll be interesting to see what Man does when it's his turn around. But back to Lamar, I think leaning on those people close to him, I think that because of this, like you said, the full coaching staff from front office to position coaches to coordinators on both sides to BK himself. I think, Blake Baker to Joe Sloan and Kyle Williams to Kevin Peoples. I mean, Frank Wilson, the associate head coach. I mean, you can talk about the Texas A&M's double D line coach and Mike Elko being on a FaceTime with Lamar leading into this. But in terms of numbers, no one built stronger relationships than the Tigers. And largely because of those numbers and because of how deep they were over the last 4 years.
We could talk about Lamar's actual recruitment and just some of the different angles and aspects that made such a huge difference down the stretch. But end of the day, he's now purple and gold bound. And so what does that mean now for this LSU class? Let's talk about, before kind of venturing on to some of the other prospects, Lamar and Richard Anderson, kind of the 1A, 1B prospects in the state, are certainly two of the top 3 ranked prospects in the state for this 2026 class. And in everyone's mind, now we're going to be on that same defensive front in the years to come. Trenton Henderson, who we talked about the last couple of weeks, the long edge rusher from Pensacola Catholic, DeAnthony Lafayette, who, we'll transition into talking a little bit about as well, the explosive linebacker edge rusher from out of Orlando. That's 4 guys that are very different athletes, very different skill sets, very different builds, and I think complement one another incredibly well. And so the group that is being put together right now in that defensive front by Blake Baker, Kyle Williams, and Kevin Peoples, how intriguing is that of just a foundation for the defensive front group in this 26 class?
Man, I mean, Big Rich and Lamar are 2 of the top 23 prospects in the country. Trenton Henderson, I'm not exactly sure where he's ranked, but we have said it on this podcast before. He's one of the premier blue chip edges in the entire country. And thinking about the 3 of them, like you mentioned, 3 different skill sets. They all play different positions, but thinking about them all on the same defensive front is absolutely a nightmare to think about what's in store for this LSU defensive line that, to be perfectly honest, has not been playing too much like an LSU defensive line in the last couple of years, rather. They're trying to restock with talent. We know that they hit the portal like none other this offseason and retooled in that department, and now they're complementing that with young talent like Lamar, who is the number 1 athlete in the country, a guy that many think can still be a superstar on the offensive side of the ball, but is going to be able to play 2 or 3 different positions on that defensive front. Big Rich Anderson, the number 2 defensive lineman in the country now, an absolute force in the middle, a monster wrecker in the middle as an interior defensive lineman in Trenton Henderson. That speed and power combination to be able to rush the passer off the edge, but also he's a fantastic run defender in his own right. Just 3 versatile, highly gifted defensive linemen now to build this class around.
And then you add later on Thursday afternoon DeAnthony Lafayette, who's listed about 6'1.5", so between 6 feet, 6'1", which can cause some fans immediately to look at and say an undersized guy. But you put on his film, long arms, explosive, can extend those arms, drive guys back, got some power to his game, and someone that I think Blake Baker, Kevin Peoples and company feel like can be a versatile piece in the box as well. Someone that, maybe has some cover ability, but certainly has the ability to get after opposing passers and fly around the field. The addition of, like we talked about last week with DeAnthony, a guy that Oklahoma had seemed pretty well positioned for a while. And then the heat kind of turned up for LSU there down the stretch. And so a really nice second edition of the day on Thursday for this recruiting class in 26 for LSU.
Yeah, they missed on a guy like JJ Bush, who, not as touted of an edge rusher per se as DeAnthony Lafayette, but someone that they wanted to use in that role where he can drop back into coverage, that he can, patrol sideline to sideline or get after the quarterback. And I think I mentioned it on the show last week. I know that JJ Bush was trying to re-engage LSU. By the way, excellent mustache, Jarrett.
Oh, thank you. I think this is I don't know, because I don't do a good job of actually keeping the stubble shaved away to focus in on the mustache. But I think this is the third week that we've talked that I've had some form of mustache going.
The clarity in the Wi-Fi connection just crystallized, and it popped. It just completely grabbed me. But again, missing on JJ Bush opened the door for LSU to make a concerted effort with DeAnthony Lafayette. And I mean, he's one of the more intriguing guys. We talked about Kevin Peoples and Blake Baker quite a bit already on this podcast, but they're very creative. They're very aggressive, and they love the position versatility. We're going to see that so much this year with the Weeks brothers and, of course, with Harold Perkins. And I'm super excited to see what he has in store with this particular front seven group coming in to Baton Rouge in the 2026 group.
Huge news staffing wise throughout the end of last week as well, where on, I think it was consecutive days, Kelvin Bolden from Ole Miss, Jeff Martin, a familiar name for LSU fans, coming back to the boot full time, a guy that was at LSU for years, then went out to USC. And then, of course, Sam Petito, who folks, Louisiana fans know well, and the job that he's done recruiting the state every stop of the way, including being a big piece of that Ohio State program that won a national championship this winter, obviously, but also had started to dip into Louisiana a little bit more with some offers and obviously, a couple commitments along the way as well. How, for fans that aren't as tapped into or focused on the recruiting side and just watching Saturdays and seeing some of the results, how would you try to quantify to them the significance of adding a Bolden, Martin, and Petito trio to this essentially LSU front office with Austin Thomas and company and the recruiting efforts there?
Okay, this is like, I'm so bad at analogies, so I wish you would have given me a couple of minutes to prepare, but give me some breathing room. This is like the New York Yankees going and saying, we got Roger Clemens and Andy Pettit, but let's go and get Randy Johnson, Greg Maddux, and then John Smoltz to add to our starting rotation. Is that a good analogy? Kelvin Bolden, who has most recently been at Ole Miss, also at UCF, not from Louisiana. He's an Ocean Springs kid in Mississippi, which is, Gulf
Close.
Coast.
Yeah, it's
Gulf
right
Coast,
there.
which is strong ties to Louisiana and has been a part of the reason why the Rebels have not only dipped into Louisiana for some of the most intriguing prospects since his arrival in Oxford, but because they have kept the best players in Mississippi home the past 3 or 4 years under Lane Kiffin since his arrival. That is something that LSU is doing at a very high clip. It's something that they want to ensure continues to happen at a high clip. 6 of the top 7 are committed. We'll get to the 7th who's not. He's really like the second, but neither here nor there. Sam Petito is a name that really was more prevalent when we were talking about Devontae Smith back in the day. Of course, when he was at Alabama, when he was at Georgia, and now since he's been at Ohio State, but is one of the best relationship builders in the entire country. He is from a meet and has been a part of several championship teams in the background. Not a guy that you hear mentioned all the time, like an Austin Thomas or a Kelvin Bolden, or we'll talk about Jeff coming up, but a guy who behind the scenes is just a critical part of the operation and someone who has been giving LSU a hard time with some of the best players, guys like Devontae Smith and Blaine Bradford. Him coming to Baton Rouge, the timing is pretty unique and special. And then Jeff, who we both know from his first time at LSU, working with Austin Thomas. Again, he's been since at USC. He's worked in the NIL space, but LSU lost a key piece when Jordan Arcemont went into the NIL space. They love to have just Louisiana homemade staffers with experience recruiting the state, with relationships with the high school coaches, and that know where to look for talent and are going to look behind every corner, and they're going to build strong relationships. Jeff, a McDonough 35 grad, has been so pivotal to so many key recruitments. And when you think about New Orleans with guys like Leonard Fournette, Racy McMath, Christian Fulton, these are guys that Jeff was, knee deep in their recruitments, given his ties. I think when he left, his absence was missed for a good portion of time. It's great to have him back on LSU's staff. So experienced, has worked in, you need the versatility to have that NIL experience, but they did everything with Louisiana flavor in mind, which it's not going to, between the coaching staff and the front office is just pretty insane to think about how deep they're rolling right now.
I love the way it's all come together for sure. Jeff is actually a guy that I know originally from us working together at the Daily Reveille 20 years ago almost at this point. And then obviously did huge things with that program through the years. I think if you are a guy that played for LSU, a family member of a guy that played for LSU, or that just was recruited by LSU at any point in the last 2 decades, pretty much, Jeff Martin and love Jeff Martin. And so he's maybe not as big a national name as Sam Petito is for some folks, but he has played huge in Louisiana and is super tapped into his home state. Even when he was out in California more full time, I felt like I was just running into him at stuff all the time, whether it be a concert here or there or whatever. If you're in New Orleans, you're just going to run into Jeff Martin and catch up a little bit. And then when you happen to see him at LSU, it's every time anyone sees Jeff, it's like a family reunion. And then, I think did a great job detailing just the magnitude of some of these hires at every step of the way. And for an LSU program that I think has done a nice job recruiting in recent cycles and now has just a tremendous upswing of talent in this 26 group and then the 27 group coming, knowing the pieces that are getting put in place feels like a lot of the puzzle is coming together to try and go win another natty here sooner than later. And we'll see how it all plays out, obviously, in practice here coming, but the pieces are coming together in a big way.
Yeah, that front office now with Austin Thomas down to Kelvin and Jeff and Sam, not to mention the coaching staff. I mean, Joe Sloan, his ties in North Louisiana and over the last 5 years, recruiting Baton Rouge, being involved in all these high stakes recruitments like Lamar Brown, Blake Baker, with not only his ties in Louisiana, but the Houston area have been so pivotal. Frank, obviously we know he's a New Orleans guy, but his time at McNeese, his time at UTSA recruiting Louisiana, I think is recruiting everywhere in this state at this stage. Tez Hankton, of course, a New Orleans guy, but he's, not only recruiting the entire state, he's recruiting the receivers across the country. Corey Raymonds, again, New Iberia covered. Kyle Williams. Now you add a Rustin piece to this flair. And then, again, guys like Jake Olson and Kevin Peoples, who may not be Louisiana guys, but as we've seen, are shouldering some weight in these high stakes recruitments. This is as proven and as Louisiana heavy a recruiting staff and coaching staff as we have ever seen in Baton Rouge, in my opinion.
Yeah, Jake went up to Haynesville and got himself Isaiah Washington for this recruiting class. So credit to all these guys for sure.
You don't just stumble into Haynesville. Let's just put it that way. So
immediately when the news Friday hit that Sam Petito was heading on back home to Louisiana and going to be a part of this, fans want to know, okay, is Blaine Bradford, who is committed to Ohio State out of Catholic Baton Rouge, is he a piece of this equation now? Once again, can LSU potentially add him and ultimately sweep the guys that they want in state in 2026? Lamar Brown was pretty quick to tweet at Blaine and say, stay home, with his little tiger emoji and all those things. And so people want to know the likelihood. And I think it's far from okay, well, Sam's coming to Baton Rouge. Now Blaine is going to end up staying in Baton Rouge too. I think there's a lot longer of a way to go than that, but definitely an interesting development when you look at the one top-ranked guy who's committed elsewhere from this 26 class in Louisiana, that he's committed to a place where you just hired away an integral part of their operation. What's kind of your latest take on how closely to watch Blaine now moving forward? Remind your fans once again that he pretty quickly expressed his recruitment was shut down, but that was in March and April, and December is a long way away. How are you feeling about the odds that maybe LSU can kind of, crack that door open a little bit and maybe flip that thing by the end of it?
Yeah. His father expressed to me that his recruitment was shut down. I believe that was the beginning of April. Shortly after, I think he committed to the Buckeyes on the 29th or the 30th of March. And his father told me it's over, it's done, stick a pin in it. And they followed those words by not taking those subsequent official visits to either Texas or LSU. He just went back up to Columbus last month. And listen, from talking to some sources at LSU and around the country, this is what I got. Blaine loves Ohio State. I've also heard this, that LSU's head coach very much wants Blaine to be a part of this class. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, Jared, that's the first time I've ever heard anything of that magnitude before about BK. We talked about Sam Petito coming from the Buckeyes, playing a huge role in these very unique recruitments where kids are, whether either it's, at the moment or for the long haul, leaning out of state, getting attacked by a fruit fly. But let's also not forget that LSU also tabbed Antonio Parks, who was recruiting Blaine when he was at Oregon and was very close to bringing Blaine out west to Eugene. They were an instant contender for the 5-star safety. And then you have longstanding members of this coaching staff, guys like Blake Baker and Jake Olson and Frank Wilson, who knows the Bradfords through in and throughout. Corey Raymond, who is now coaching Blaine's older brother, Jacob, in Baton Rouge. I'm not saying that a flip is imminent. I'm not even going to say that it's going to happen. But you would be naive to not think that LSU is planning to play. LSU has now locked down 6 of the top 7 prospects in the state. And and like you mentioned, the guys that they really want are committed, with the exception of Blaine Bradford. They now can, and a lot of those guys like Lamar, et cetera, have shut down their recruitments. They're done. That doesn't, Big Rich has not made any other visits. Same with Aiden Hall. They are putting together a plan, and there's not an expectation. He will be in Tiger Stadium this fall. He's going to watch his older brother play as a freshman. Can LSU move the needle enough to think that they can get both brothers on there? That's to be determined. That's to be seen. But you would be naive to think that, 1, Blaine won't be visiting LSU, and 2, LSU will just kick in the tires on this elite safety from right outside that, the stadium that plays at Memorial Stadium on Friday night. So to me, there's a lot to go. There's a long ways to go in this recruitment, but I'm here for the ride.
It is an extremely interesting wrinkle for Jacob to be a part of the 25 signing class, because the Buckeyes really have no ability to say, you can't go to campus and watch your brother play. Like, it kind of takes that card out of the equation, where some programs would want to say, don't go take another visit. Don't go see this school or that school. You can't really do that if Jacob Bradford's potentially on the field in some of these games this fall, and you want, the family opportunity to go support Big Brother on a given Saturday. But will certainly be interesting to watch. I think, like you said, a much longer process than maybe some fans had hoped to hear coming out of Friday, where they just think, okay, we're going to flip him now, and it's going to be a much more of an uphill battle, if there's even any battle to be had by the end of it. But there's some interesting pieces to it for sure. And LSU is recruiting at an extremely high level in state regardless, have all the rest of the prospects really in line that they have targeted and prioritized for this class. They've had success out of state, obviously, most recently DeAnthony Lafayette. And now we're kind of watching as a couple of other really high profile prospects from out of state announced top 4s, top 5s over the last few days. Darius Gray, the offensive lineman from up there in Virginia that we've talked about before, announced his top 5 of South Carolina, Clemson, LSU, Tennessee, and Ohio State. Jace Matthews, the fantastic Mississippi wide receiver, announced the top 4 this week, as well as an August 8th commitment date. He's got LSU, A&M, Auburn, and home state Ole Miss in the mix. 2 guys that I think LSU is really well positioned with. That I think both of these guys have kind of expressed that LSU has felt like one of their top 2 or 3 schools of those 5 or 4. What is your outlook for right now Darius Gray, who does not have a commitment date and may take it to the end, and Jace Matthews, who, now that he has one on the books, is very quickly approaching? We're just a few weeks out.
Yeah. South Carolina has been the heavy favorite with Darius Gray for a long stretch of his recruitment, but he made 2 visits to Baton Rouge in the past few months. One for an unofficial, and then for his OV. And after the spring official visit, there was a lot of people that felt that Darius Gray wanted to go to Baton Rouge and play for the Tigers and stop traffic. If you've heard this one, it's because of Brad Davis, who is a bona fide recruiter of the year candidate at this point. South Carolina has given him plenty to think about, and they got the last official visit. But this is a recruitment that might span into, November, December. So between those two SEC programs, Tennessee really loves Darius Gray. And Ohio State is not messing around. And Tyler Bowen, when he was at Va Tech, was recruiting Darius Gray. So I think that this could get pulled in a lot of different directions the longer it plays out. But if I were to make a prediction today, I'd probably go with LSU, with South Carolina being a really close second. And then for Jace, depending on who you talk to, you hear A&M buzz, you hear Auburn buzz, you hear LSU buzz. Ultimately, the most buzz I've heard is between LSU and Auburn. Kind of a relationship situation. He doesn't live too far from LSU's campus out there in Lee County, Mississippi. And LSU is definitely in need of a fourth receiver in this class. And whether Tristan Keys is still committed at August 8th or is maybe potentially has flipped, that might be a factor in this recruitment. I wouldn't be surprised if, joining a 3 receiver class or a 4 receiver class might be the catalyst here. But Auburn is definitely making the strongest push. They don't have many commitments at this point in the cycle. And his best relationship is probably with Marcus Davis, their wide receiver coach. A former high school rival, Deuce Knight, is the quarterback in waiting in Auburn. So there's an obvious connection there. But A&M isn't going away in this one either, so it could get interesting down the stretch.
I'm looking forward to watching both. It feels like LSU is going to be in the mix in both, down to the respective wires. That they seem like they're well positioned with each of these guys. We've heard a lot of praise for LSU from Darius Gray and what a fantastic addition as an interior lineman to that group that Brad Davis already has committed. What a fantastic addition Darius would be. And then on the Jace Matthews side, he's mentioned Cortez Hankton and loving that relationship. He's mentioned a lot of the technology and resources of the LSU facilities at this point and how much that's caught his attention during his trips to Baton Rouge. And so we'll keep an eye on those two guys heading into their senior seasons and, for Darius potentially all the way through signing day in December. Let's close this thing up with a couple of New Orleans notes. I don't want to check into this Airbnb on Thursday and have our hosts asking me why not more New Orleans specific coverage on this week's Recruit That Boot. I don't want to be sitting at, Rum House or somewhere and have people clamoring, what the hell are you and Sam doing? I want to know about Tulane's, next commit potentially. I want to know Zyron Forstall, why is he leaving? What's the deal there? And so let's start with Wednesday. We're expecting a commitment announcement from Lafayette Christian wide receiver Braden Allen, go-to target for that Knights offense this past fall. He's down to Tulane, Texas Tech, Vanderbilt, and I knew I was going to leave one out.
Boston College.
Boston College. There you go. No offense to the Eagles. I don't really think Braden's heading up Northeast. I think he's staying a little bit closer to home. And so let's talk about that. A guy that they out there in Lafayette, they talk about as kind of their Megatron of that offense. And if not for some early coaching dynamics at play there and having to make a midseason coaching change and everything, they think as big as his numbers were as a junior, they could have been that much bigger with a little bit more stability in the program in 2025. And they're expecting some huge things for him this upcoming fall. You and I now both, I think, have picks in for Tulane on Wednesday. What's kind of the vibe? It seemed like Texas Tech was well positioned with Braden for a while. A guy who spent some of his earlier life growing up in Texas, but is now in Lafayette, obviously. Do you think the Green Wave pull this thing out on Wednesday?
Yeah. We both covered Jordan Allen back in the day. And the biggest thing I took away from that was everyone just kept saying, his brother's going to be twice as good. And I think Braden Allen might be twice as good as Jordan is coming out of Lafayette Christian. So I'm super stoked to see what he does as a senior this year for the Knights. Would not be surprised if we see them in December in the Dome. Texas Tech was definitely trending for various stretches of this recruitment. But as this got closer to the July 16th commitment date, there's a lot of steam and around Uptown about their chances with Braden. We know that Carter Sheridan is not only one of the best in-state recruiters, but just one of the best developers of talent. You mentioned everyone in his circle thinks that he can continue to ascend, to continue to make the leap. And I think Carter Sheridan has shown that he's been able to do it with guys like Shaz Preston down there in Uptown. And I think Braden is kind of feeling the wave right now. I had my prediction in for the Wave to win out tomorrow.
Yeah, the way that I asked it was probably not great because I had already said that we both put predictions in that it feels well positioned for the Wave. But he's a tall, long receiver that can go up and get the ball. And when I was watching some of his early film that I was getting sent, to look at as a potential bootleggers player at some point, when he was heading into to LCA a couple years back. His speed really stood out at that point too, and so he brings a lot to the table if they add him, it would be a nice addition for a program that you mentioned. Shaz and some of these guys, they've had a nice track record of some receivers coming through here in recent years. And then, unfortunately, someone who's heading out of New Orleans, Zyron Forstall, we've talked about so much, top-ranked prospect in this 27 class. Was right there on Carrollton and Banks at Jesuit, repping the Blue Jays these last couple years. I as an alum, was looking forward to watching him these next couple years. Both as an alum and as a Louisiana media member who just enjoys watching the best high school football players play on Friday nights and Saturday afternoons. Z announced on Tuesday that he'll be transferring out to IMG Academy for the next couple of years of high school. Wish him all the best. Obviously, looking forward to watching him continue to develop, albeit from a little bit farther away than anticipated. I know some LSU fans worry about any guy that they want to see eventually in purple and gold when they leave the state and head elsewhere. What is kind of your bigger picture takeaway from a recruiting standpoint of the news of Zyron now heading to IMG down there in Bradenton, Florida, and where his recruitment stands as he heads into the upperclassman stretch of his high school career?
Yeah, obviously LSU, if you're an LSU fan, you do worry about the distance. He's more now the closest campus to him is Florida Gators, which, got him on campus last month. Jabbar Jalouk is over there. Billy Napier has ties to Louisiana. He really liked his first visit to the Swamp. But, I think that since June 15th and probably even before that, the staff has been on Zyron's case about staying close to home. I think that he's one of the kids that grew up watching and really wanting to play for LSU. So we talked about that with Lamar Brown. So when it's at the end of the day, when it's time to make his decision, that's going to be a factor for Zyron. In addition to Florida, Texas A&M, Georgia, and USC have also been really prevalent in his recruitment since the 15th. He's been to all those schools, and I think he's got a visit coming up to Athens here pretty soon. But it's going into his junior year. He's already a top target for this staff, and the staff is fully aware of him. I do not expect them to slow down the pace of this recruitment, but because he's playing at IMG, they have been able to recruit IMG in the past. And I think that in the NIL era, in this new era of college football recruiting, I don't think that, playing, your high school, your junior, we don't know if he'll stay there for his senior year, but he's going to play his junior season there. I don't think that necessarily changes too much for a school, like LSU or, a couple of these other programs we mentioned. I think that it makes it just as easy to recruit them. You're going to send a coach to IMG almost every day in the spring anyway, so as long as those relationships with mom and dad who are still in Louisiana are strong, with his agent and representative are still strong, I don't think you have too much to worry about.
Best case is Zyron goes out there, continues to develop at a high level, has a great time in terms of his football progress, and is just missing home like crazy, missing mom, dad, and all the food and Mardi Gras and music and everything that we have a little bit of an edge on in New Orleans to Bradenton, Florida, and then get a little homesick and want to come back and be a home state guy. But we'll see how it all shakes out, man. We got a long way to go in this one. A lot of teams coast to coast that LSU is going to be battling regardless of where Z was playing his high school ball. And so unfortunately it won't be in blue and white there in Mid-City, but it'll be, in blue and white there in Bradenton, Florida, I guess. So we'll keep an eye on that. Again, he's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. All the folks down there in New Orleans, you got your New Orleans fix of recruiting updates on this week's Recruit That Boot. So, lay off me on a staycation later this week. Again, this is Louisiana Versailles Recruit That Boot. And until next time, y'all be well.
Think if some of these mid-city restaurants would maybe work together, we could keep Zyron in mid-city. We got Mid-City Pizza. We got Juan's Mid-City. Come on, we got our barbecue place.
So Blue Oak, you talking about?
Blue Oak.
If I'm not mistaken, and now we're going like wild tangent, obviously with food, which we are wont to do. Zyron, when we saw him after the spring game, was referencing that as he bulked up and he was being asked about what he'd been eating to bulk up, he said something about, man, I had this great like German ice cream, whatever. And I said, German ice cream? What are you talking about, man? And he couldn't remember. And I said, are you talking about Bricados on camera? And Coach Manali kind of laughed a little bit. He probably is. It's probably exactly what he's talking about. But we'll work on sort of the nationalities of ice cream that Zyron is eating and what his favorites are, because I do feel like it was probably Angelo Bricados right there. But
come on, and maybe they can donate to keep him in Mid-City and Banks and Carrollton. Come on.
Yeah, we'll make that happen. I'll go swing by Bricados and start to try and grease the wheels on the NIL package from Bricados to Zyron Forstall for the 2027 recruiting cycle. I'll report back next week and let you know how all that went.
Yeah, maybe they can give us an NIL deal too. That'd be tight.
He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. Y'all take it easy. This is Louisiana Versailles Recruiting.